Okay, so we start our discussion on the development of finite elements for two dimensions, and the extension to three dimensions is straightforward. Apart from the additional complexity of treating one more dimension, it really doesn't change anything. So if you understand the finite elements of two dimension, the complete process, then three-dimensional analysis is straightforward. So we will concentrate on the modeling of two-dimensional problems primarily. So what is the simplest figure, geometrical figure which can enclose an area? When we say two dimension, then we are obviously looking at an area domain. So what is the simplest geometrical figure which can enclose an area? A triangle. So not surprisingly, first finite element to have been developed was a triangle, and a triangle is defined by three vertices. So this is what we refer to as three-node triangle, right? And that was the first finite element to have been developed. So this is what you see is omega e, so that is element domain. So this is defined by three vertices of the triangle, and we label the vertices as in counterclockwise order. So let's say if I start with this node, then this is labeled as I. Next one in counterclockwise direction, this is jth node, and this is kth node. I might as well refer to it as 1, 2, 3, and so on. Right? So these three, once I define these three vertices, this geometry is well defined. There is no ambiguity as far as the area enclosed by this triangle is concerned. And these three vertices, they uniquely define the area enclosed by this triangular domain, and that is what we refer to as finite element. The next figure in the inclusion of area, next simple figure is a rectangle or quadrilateral, right? So four-node quadrilateral is another simple geometric figure which can enclose an area, and that is taken as a finite element as well. So that was the next finite element to have been developed. So simplest, most simple geometry would be, of course, a rectangle or a square defined by four nodes. Now obviously we can see that one element, one rectangle element can do the job of two triangular elements, right? So what would have required two triangles to cover this area? A rectangle element, a single rectangle element can do the job at the addition of 2 degrees of freedom, 2 additional degrees of freedom. So one node is extra, and there are 2 node degrees of freedom at each node, that is displacement along x and displacement along y. So that is an additional node and 2 extra degrees of freedom, but it does the job of 2 elements, 2 triangular elements. So that is a considerable saving in computational effort, and generally triangular elements are very rarely used these days because they are found to be little stiffer than the rectangular elements, corresponding rectangular elements. Right? So now let us work on the how do we get these finite element approximation over these individual domains, and how do we develop the equilibrium equations for the element level equilibrium, and that will pave the way for future developments. So the essence of finite element analysis or finite element method is that we allow ourselves the luxury of dealing with very simple and regular geometrical shapes for which it is easier to define, easier to evaluate the integrals, domain integrals, boundary integrals, and also it is easier to interpret the results. Right. So the simplest geometrical elements for two-dimensional domain are three-node triangle and four-node rectangle, and these are defined by triangle is defined by three vertices, and rectangle is of course defined by four vertices, and the node numbering is done in counterclockwise order. This is an important aspect which you should all adhere to. The node numbering is always done in counterclockwise fashion. There are certain issues related to the direction of the coordinate frame of references, and this order of numbering is actually linked to that. So simplest two-dimensional geometrical figures which meet these requirements of enclosing area are triangles and rectangles, and that's what we have discussed. So, and finite elements are defined by the area enclosed in the region defined by the vertices, the meeting point of intersection point of two edges of the elements. Right? The variation of primary variables within a finite element is defined by the interpolation between the values of primary variables at a few fixed points, vertices, and some more points if needed, either on the element edges or in the interior of the element, called the nodes. So that follows from the interpolation theory. We need, for two-dimensional elasticity, there are two unknowns, that is the displacement along x and displacement along y, and those displacement along x and y, for example, u is the displacement along x direction. Now this u varies. It may be displacement along x, but it will be different at this point, it will be different at this point, it will be different at this point, might be different at this point. So u itself might vary throughout the domain as a function of x and y. Similarly, the displacement along y would vary throughout this domain as a function of, continuous function of x and y. So we need to define how this variation with respect to x and y happens. If we can define this variation, then the domain integrals that we have looked at in the weak form of weighted residual statement, those domain integrals can be evaluated and boundary integrals can be evaluated, and we have the equilibrium equation available for further processing. Now the variation can of course be defined as an interpolation of these values, the value of the primary variable. So for example, the displacement along x at node I referred to as ui, displacement along x at node j referred to as uj, displacement along x at node k is referred to as uk. So variation of u is given as interpolation between ui, uj and uk, and corresponding interpolation functions are developed at these nodes of interpolation, and the complete interpolation model can be developed for triangular elements as well as for rectangular elements, and the interpolation functions are of course dependent on the geometry. Right? So For two-dimensional elasticity problems, the desired approximations, as I said, there are two unknowns, basic unknowns, that is primary variables, displacement along x and displacement along y, and within an element E, they vary as a function of x and y, and this variation is given as an interpolation model. So Ni Ui, I ranging from 1 to n is the number of nodes. Now this number of nodes, there are nodes at the vertices definitely, but there can be additional nodes placed in between along the edge, at the edges, or even in the interior of the element if required. That is dependent on what is the degree of interpolation function that is required, that we are trying to build, right? So if it is a linear function, then there will be some requirement. If it is a quadratic polynomial, then there is a certain number of terms that need to be accounted for, and similarly for cubic or higher order interpolation, right? So we have similar interpolation model for displacement along x and displacement along y. Now these interpolation functions or shape functions, as they are commonly referred to in finite element literature, because they provide the shape to the displacement field or the field or basic unknown of the problem, the field variable of the problem. So because the field variable, the unknowns are now the values of the field variable at the nodes. How this unknown variable or the field variation of these primary variables happens within the element is defined by these interpolation functions, and that is why they are referred to, they are also referred to as the shape functions. Right, so Ni xy as a function of xy is the interpolation polynomial corresponding to node I, and it satisfies, it has to satisfy the basic requirement of interpolation, that is, the interpolation function for corresponding to node I should evaluate the unity at node I, and it should vanish at all other nodes of the interpolation. So Ni at xj yj should be equal to delta ij, Kronecker delta. That's the interpolation condition. The function values at the nodes are referred to as the nodal values, and these are the unknown variables of the problem which will be evaluated during the final stage, at the solution stage of finite element solution. But the variation of the primary variable u within the element is given as an interpolation between these nodal values, and these nodal values are as yet unknown. We don't know what these nodal values are when we are constructing this approximation. These nodal values will be evaluated during the process of solution. So interpolation or shape functions are defined such that Ni at xj yj is equal to delta ij, with I and j denoting the nodes of an element, right? So that's an interpolation condition. So if we combine these two, then polynomial approximation for the primary variables within an element, let's say there are n number of nodes within the element, and there are 2 degrees of freedom, u1, v1, u1 displacement along x and displacement along y at each node. So there will be 2n number of variables within an element. So 2 degrees of freedom at each node. So u1, v1, u2, v2, u3, v3 up to un, vn. So this is the order in which variables are, nodal variables are set, and the approximation, continuous approximation of u and v within the element is given by interpolation model, that is n1 u1 plus n2 u2 plus n3 u3 plus n4 u4 up to nn un is the interpolation between n number of primary variable values at n number of nodes. And similarly, v is equal to, approximation for v is given by similar interpolation model, N1V1 plus N2V2 plus N3V3 up to NNVN. So similar interpolation model, interpolating between the values of primary variable at n number of nodes. And collectively, I can write this longhand expression in a compact representation. Collectively, I can refer to this as a compact representation. Vector of the unknown variables, field variables within the element U hat approximation, which actually comprises two components U and V, is given by this shape function matrix and multiplied by the nodal degrees of freedom, vector of nodal degrees of freedom, Ui. Right? So that provides us the basic approximation as a function of x and y, and we can now substitute this in our weighted residual statement and work out the equilibrium equation considering weighting functions to be these interpolation functions. Now, before we proceed, this is we need to know what is the interpolation function before we proceed with specific equilibrium equation calculation. So the unknown variation of the displacement field within the element subdomain can be represented by a few discrete unknown nodal values of the displacement if appropriate interpolation functions are specified. Right? So it all boils down to construction of interpolation functions. If we can construct correct interpolation functions, the problem is more or less solved. It all is left to the computer to churn out the numbers, that's all. This is where the human intervention is required. Computer cannot decide on its own what kind of interpolation and how to generate those interpolation functions. This requires human intelligence. So a complete description of a finite element is provided by its nodes and the corresponding interpolation functions, and that interpolation function describes the degree of interpolation polynomial, or what is the variation, field variation, whether it is linear or quadratic or cubic, and obviously it then depends on the number of nodes of interpolation, because with increasing degrees of polynomial variation, you need those many coefficients of the polynomial terms. Those need to be defined, those need to be constrained, and you need to generate those many constraint equations, and those constraint equations can only be generated by defining the nodes of interpolation. Right? So an nth degree polynomial will require n plus 1 number of constraints, and that means you need n plus 1 number of nodes, or the other way to say that is n number of nodes would uniquely define n minus 1 degree of polynomial variation within the element. So if I have n number of nodes defining the variation of the unknown, then I can go for at most n minus 1 degree of polynomial variation. Right? So the basic requirements for polynomial approximation for the convergence of finite element solution, we discussed this with reference to one-dimensional elements as well. We need that for structural mechanics problem, convergence is guaranteed if the approximation can represent rigid body motion of the system, of the body, and it can represent the constant strain states. The constant requirement of constant strain states is coming from the limiting case, if I keep on refining the mesh and keep on looking at smaller and smaller areas, so triangle, let's say it encompasses an area A. Now I refine the element and I now use a triangle, the largest triangle which can represent maybe A by 2, and subsequently I keep on refining the mesh and reducing the area enclosed within the triangle. So the limiting case of that would be a triangle would be approaching a point. All three nodes would coalesce at single point, and that would be a description, a limiting case. You cannot go any finer than that. And at that point, the strain field is of course a constant. Right? It doesn't vary with x, y, and z. So strain at a point is a constant value. So this limiting condition should be contained in the approximation that we develop. So the finite element approximation should be capable of representing constant strain field. So all over the element the strain is constant. That is the minimum requirement that all finite element approximations should adhere to. Right? So the most elementary polynomial in 2 dimensions which satisfies these 2 requirements is a linear polynomial, that is P1 as a function of xy given by a0 plus a1x plus a2y. These contain 3 unknown parameters. Now, how does this satisfy the basic requirements? You can evaluate, let's say this is displacement u is given by a0 plus a1x plus a2y, displacement v is given by b0 plus b1x plus b2y, and then try to calculate the strain field, and you will find that this does represent a constant strain. Displacement is a linear variation, strain is the first order derivative, first partial derivative, and that would be a constant field. So constant derivative condition is attained, and the constant term that you see here, a0 and b0 for v1, for the displacement along v, this will represent the constant displacement. That's the rigid body. The whole idea of rigid body is the displacement is constant, uniform with respect to x and y. So if you change x and y, the displacement field remains the same. Right? So that's the rigid body motion. So if I include this constant term, then I can actually represent the rigid body motion, translation. Right? For rotation, rigid body rotation, of course these linear terms are also required. And the rate of convergence is improved. Rate of convergence of the approximate solution, how fast it converges to the true solution, or what is the order of error in the solution, approximate solution. So that can be improved by including higher degree terms only if all terms constituting a complete polynomial of that degree are included in the approximation. Right? So complete polynomial represents, again this is a very important concept. The approximation should be complete up to the degree that is required for convergence, what we are aiming for. So a complete polynomial would require all lower order terms to be included. So for example, a second degree complete polynomial would require a constant term, a linear term in x, a linear term in y, a quadratic term in x, a cross product term in xy, and a quadratic term in y. So this is a complete quadratic polynomial. Even if any one of the terms is missing from that polynomial cannot be called a complete polynomial of second degree, and that would be not suitable for use in finite element analysis. So a complete second degree polynomial, this contains 6 arbitrary coefficients, right? A0, A1, A2, A3, A4, and this is A5. 5 should be subscript. I need to correct that. Right? So the coefficients of the polynomial of approximation, they are to be, this is general polynomial form, and they can be mapped onto the primary variables of approximation at the nodes of the element. So they can be A0, A1, A2, A3, A4, A5. They can be mapped. They can be expressed in terms of U1, U2, U3, U4, and U5. Right? So, and U6, if at all. So there will be 6 nodes required, at least. So the number of independent terms in polynomial approximation should be equal to the number of nodes in the element. That is how we will be able to impose the constraint equations to evaluate the unknown terms of the polynomial. The terms of polynomial approximation are chosen such that all lower order terms up to the required degree of complete polynomial, including the constant term, are included. So if that is adhered to, then if this condition is adhered to, then the convergence is guaranteed. The finite element analysis would or should converge as the analysis progresses and as the more refined analysis are conducted. A few higher order polynomial terms may also have to be included in the approximation so as to make the number of independent terms equal to the number of nodes in the element. Right? We will see this what this means. Right? So this comes from the complications of number of dimensions, increasing number of dimensions, and that has an interplay, that has an effect. And this problem becomes progressively more serious. One dimension, we don't have this problem. 2 dimension, it crops up. 3 dimension problems, it becomes even worse. Right? So all is not rosy, but you need to work with whatever you have got. You cannot bend the rules just because it is inconvenient. So in such cases where additional extra terms are required, the extraneous terms are selected from the Pascal triangle, which are placed symmetrically about the axis of triangle. Pascal triangle for 2-dimensional problem, Pascal pyramid for 3-dimensional problems. And this requirement of symmetrical terms is necessary to enforce geometric isotropy in the approximation of primary variable. And this refers to the chosen polynomial approximation not being sensitive to the user-specified orientation of frame of reference. Now this is a very important consideration. I don't want, the choice of frame of reference is of course the prerogative of the analyst, whosoever is conducting the analysis, right? I may choose to place origin and the orientation of axis in some way. Another person performing the same analysis might choose to place the origin and the orientation of axis in some other way, some other orientation, right? So that choice of frame of reference from which, with reference to which we measure our coordinates, and everything is referred to that origin, that of course should not influence the result of the analysis. The problem is same. Both the analysts are actually looking at the same problem. So the result should not be dependent on the choice of frame of reference. And it is to enforce that independence from the choice of frame of reference. It is required that the interpolation functions that we choose or the polynomial approximation that we choose for approximation of the primary variable, variation of primary variable within the element, the terms, polynomial approximation terms should be balanced with respect to independent variables. So there should be a balanced representation of both x and y in case of 2 dimension, and in case of 3 dimension, all 3 independent variables x, y and z should have balanced representation. So that it really doesn't matter if a particular user chooses to call x as z, y as x and z as y for some other user. Right? So the results should not depend on the choice of frame of reference. So this is referred to as geometric isotropic. The model that you develop should be isotropic with respect to geometry description. And this is what Pascal triangle looks like. So degrees of polynomial, it's a simple statement of terms. So 1, that's a constant term, 0th degree polynomial. First degree polynomial, there are x and y. And second degree polynomial quadratic, there are 3 terms, x square, xy, y square. Cubic polynomial, there are 4 terms, x cube, x square y, xy square, y cube. Quartic, the 4th degree polynomial, you have terms from x raised to the power 4, x cube y, x square y square, xy cube, and y raised to the power 4. And similarly, you can keep on building up this triangle, and you see this is a Pascal triangle. This is what is known as Pascal triangle. And if you add the 3rd dimension, then this becomes one face of the pyramid. The other pyramid would be face corresponding to yz. The 3rd face would be corresponding to xz terms. Right? So the terms have to be selected symmetrically in that Pascal pyramid. Right? So as long as my approximation, if I choose my approximation with the symmetrically placed terms, then I should be doing fine in the finite element analysis. So for triangle, 3-node triangle, all that I need is one constant term, linear term in x and linear term in y. That's all. That serves the purpose. I mean, and the terms selected are complete. I mean, the constant term, that is rigid body motion, is included. Linear terms, so the constant string states are included. And the terms are all symmetrically placed, and that is the basic approximation. But for a 4-node rectangle, I need one more term, because there are 4 number of nodes. I need there would be 4 independent terms. So I need one more term in polynomial approximation just to meet that constraint, the establishment of the constraint equation for 4th node. So obviously I cannot choose anything like x square or y square. I mean, these 3 terms are of course there. This is the completeness requirement. These 3 terms, constant term and linear term in x and linear term in y, would of course be there. I need to choose one more term which would be extraneous, which would be beyond this complete polynomial. And that requirement is coming only from the fact that I have more number of nodes than the complete polynomial terms that can be included. So additional term, that is spurious or extraneous term, there is only one possibility, that is xy. If I choose xy term here, then it is symmetrically placed in the Pascal triangle. Both the coordinate directions x and y, they are equally represented. It really doesn't matter how the axes are oriented. The result is not going to change. You will always get the same result irrespective of the orientation of the axis. But if you choose either x square or y square, or for that matter x cube or y cube, obviously that's a very very outlandish choice and completely irrational. Nevertheless, choice of x square and y square is also completely irrational, because that introduces a preferential direction in the approximation. If I choose the fourth term as x square, then this approximation becomes x heavy. If I choose y square as the fourth term, then this approximation becomes, these three terms and this fourth term becomes y heavy, and results are going to be sensitive to what a user calls as x-axis and y-axis. Right? So different users may refer to x and y differently, and the results are not going to be comparable in that case. And that is the worst thing that can happen to any scientific investigation. The results have to be reproducible. That is the basic tenet of any scientific investigation, reproducibility of your results. Right, so let us go back to our discussion of triangular elements. The simplest element of this family is a three-noded triangle, the oldest finite element, the first ever finite element to have been considered. The field variation of the primary variable within three-node triangular element is given by a complete polynomial up to first degree with three independent terms. We saw that those three terms, constant term, linear term in x and linear term in y, and polynomial approximation u can be given as a0 plus a1x plus a2y, and I can arrange it in matrix form as polynomial terms 1xy, that's a row vector, multiplied by a column vector a0, a1, a2. So this is actually equal to 1 multiplied by a0 plus x multiplied by a1 plus y multiplied by a2. That is what you have. And I can refer to this as polynomial terms, matrix of polynomial terms. So P multiplied by coefficient vector A. So P is the row vector of polynomial terms, A is the vector of polynomial coefficients, also known as the generalized coordinates to be evaluated from the requirement of polynomial interpolation. Now the interpolation, this is to be an interpolation model, then this variation should evaluate to the nodal values of u hat at these three nodes. So when u hat is evaluated at xi, yi, it should evaluate to ui. When this is evaluated at xj, yj, it should evaluate to uj. When it is evaluated at xk, yk, it should evaluate to uk. Right? And that is what this refers to. So I replaced ijk with indices, numerical indices 1, 2 and 3 just for compact representation. So approximation within the element as a function at xi, yi should be equal to ui for all values of I ranging from 1 to 3. So we can look at it and substitute that. So we have this condition, u hat evaluated at x1, y1 should be equal to u1, u hat evaluated at x2, y2 should be equal to u2, u hat evaluated at x3, y3 should be equal to u3, right? And because these are three vertices, they are non-collinear, they are not collinear. So all these rows and columns, they are independent of each other, and this inverse, this matrix, coordinate matrix can be inverted. It is invertible, right? So the idea behind that is this is a valid set of algebraic equations which has a unique solution. So A can be expressed in terms of U, the nodal displacements, and that is given as A is equal to C inverse. This matrix is referred to as C. So A is equal to C inverse U. That's the nodal variables. So C represents a matrix of nodal coordinates and U denotes the vector of nodal values of primary variable. So we go back to our approximation, that is U hat is equal to PA. So we replace for PA A here as C inverse U, and we have PC inverse U. And if we look at the interpolation model, this matrix P multiplied by C inverse, this has to be interpolation function, because this interpolation model U hat is equal to N1 U1 plus N2 U2 plus N3 U3, and this is of course U1 U2 U3. So this matrix product should be, each term of these should correspond to the desired interpolation functions N1, N2 and N3. So these are the interpolation functions such that you can verify that Ni as evaluated at xj yj is equal to delta ij, that is the Kronecker delta. Right. So you can work out these numbers and see that. I mean, generate just a vertex triangle with random nodes, degrees of random coordinates. As long as there are 3 independent nodes, you should be able to generate that. Right. So try to work it out and find out what is the interpolation function for those 3 nodes that you generate, and then verify whether this condition holds. Ni xj yj should be equal to delta ij. These shape functions, you will realize that there is a certain degree of symmetry in the calculations that you will find. These shape functions may be directly obtained. Okay, there is a typo here. This should be MED. So these shape functions may also be directly obtained from the nodal coordinates of the nodes. As for Ni, ith node, this is the shape function is same as 1 over cross delta. Delta is the area of the triangle formed by these 3 vertices, and the shape function is of course 1 over cross delta multiplied by alpha I plus beta I x plus gamma ij, and alpha, beta, gamma, they are the coordinates, they are dependent on the coordinates. So you can see the cyclic symmetry here. Alpha I is equal to xj yk minus xk yj. You will find it, if you write that matrix, you can relate it to the determinant determinant of this. So alpha I is the constant term of the approximation that you see here. Alpha I is the constant term. So for constant term 1, this is referring to, this multiplies with the constant term. This will multiply with the constant term, so it will be x2 y3 minus x3 yj. So that is xj yk minus xk yj. That is what you are referring to here, xj yk minus xk yj. Beta I, that is the term corresponding to x, and if you get that related to that matrix of coordinates, you can find the determinant expression as submatrix determinant yj minus yk, and gamma I, the coefficient of y, it multiplies it, it is given by the coordinates of j and k, x coordinates of nodes j and k. Right. Now this is for the node I. For node j, you can again go back to the same matrix of coordinates and work it out. For node j, it will be based on these this second row and terms, and you can work out according to the determinant rule, or you can just permute the indices. wherever you have to find out values for corresponding values for node j, alpha j can be computed by just permitting wherever you have j replace it by I, wherever you have k replace it by j, and that's all. Right? So I gets replaced by j gets replaced by k, and k gets replaced by I. So it's a cyclic permutation. I stand corrected. I have mentioned j is replaced by I. No, j is replaced by k and k is replaced by I. So that's how the I, j and k, they permute cyclically in their natural order for deriving the interpolation functions for other nodes. And that's a very convenient expression to remember and work out the interpolation functions for any set of coordinates, 3 nodes. So the polynomial approximation within the element is complete up to the first degree, leading to constant first derivative, and therefore this element is referred to as constant strain triangle or CST. That's almost a universal term, universal acceptance to this term. CST is referred to as synonymous with 3-node triangle, 3-node triangular finite element. And it ensures C0 continuity across element boundaries. That's another requirement, that we need to ensure that the primary variables are continuous across element boundaries. So compatibility. So look at these 2 elements. Let's say this is one element and this is another element, and just for simplicity I align this y-axis along this inter-element boundary. So the variation, let's take any variation is defined by a0 plus a1x plus a2y for this element, and for this element it will be let's say b0 plus b1x plus b2y. And at this common boundary, for this choice of frame of reference, just to make things simpler, x coordinate is of course 0. So the variation now at this boundary becomes from this element it becomes a0 plus a1 y keeps on changing, x is 0, so the x term drops out, and from this element it will become b0 plus b1y. So it's a linear variation with respect to y. Now a linear variation is uniquely defined by 2 points, and you have 2 points here that are shared by these 2 elements. So the variation of u and v along this edge as you obtain from element E is exactly same as the variation of u and v along this edge as you obtain from the approximation of E plus 1, because a linear variation defined by 2 points is going to be unique, and those 2 points are shared by these 2 elements. Those 2 nodes are shared by these 2 elements, and the values of the primary variable at these 2 nodes are of course the same for both the elements. So the variation of interpolation between these 2 values is obviously going to be identical, and that ensures the continuity of the primary variable across the element boundaries. So that's how we ensure the compatibility requirement. So we have ensured the completeness requirement, we have ensured the compatibility requirement, and we have also ensured the C0 continuity, that is the existence of the first order derivative, non-vanishing first order derivative. So that's completeness requirement, right? And of course we also are consistent, and geometric isotropy is of course adhered to. So that is, approximation is consistent with the basic idea. Now, how do we increase the degree of approximation? So, triangular family, it's very interesting that it always provides just enough number of nodes as required for constructing the desired degree of polynomial interpolation. First degree complete requires 3 terms and you have 3 nodes. Second degree complete requires 6 terms, 6 independent terms, and you have 6 nodes that can define that by placing 3 nodes at the mid side of these edges. So these are the 3 basic first 3 nodes, corner vertices, 1, 2, 3. Then we define 3 more nodes, 4, 5 and 6 at the mid side of these edges, and together they form 6 nodes or 6 constraints which are sufficient to define complete quadratic variation, which will require 6 polynomial terms, right? And therefore a quadratic variation for displacement would imply linear strain variation within the element, and therefore this triangle is referred to as linear strain triangle, LST, in some of the textbooks. It's not as widespread terminology as CST, but still, just in analogy with CST, we sometimes refer to this 6-node triangle as LST. Cubic variation, we just place the mid-side nodes at 1/3 points. So 1/3, 2/3, and these are the 2 nodes on each edge, and then 1 node at the centroid that you provide that will complete the variation for primary variable. So 10 terms for cubic variation. So quadratic polynomial approximation for the primary variable can be achieved in 6-node triangle defined by 3 vertices and 3 mid-side nodes. 6 nodes for interpolations provide 6 constraints for evaluating coefficients of the polynomial approximation, which are sufficient for constructing a second degree complete polynomial. Right? You can go back and look at the Pascal triangle, and you will see that for second degree complete there are 6 number of total terms that you need, and 6 second degree polynomial will have 6 coefficients, 6 unknown coefficients. So in general, for a triangular element, the total number of nodes required for a polynomial approximation of degree p is given by number of nodes ND is equal to p plus 1 multiplied by p plus 2 by 2. That's a general result, just for reference. Right. So I will stop here, and we can discuss if you have any queries.